Okay, so we talked about antebellum South, but we need to talk more about the enslaved experience here. So, APUSH under 10, let's go. The enslaved experience, just like everything else we've talked about, gender often affects experiences. Women are expected to be mothers, nurses, wives, and laborers, and the enslaved women are not respected as women. Typically, if they're mothering, they're not mothering for long, unless you have a really, really generous enslaver, there's a good chance your children are going to be sold or taken from you. And we already know that a lot of men, or maybe not a lot, I don't know, again, we're only talking like 10% of the population, so I don't have a number for that. But we do know from records that men of the elite class definitely took enslaved women as sex slaves. I don't know how else to put that. There's a better way, but under 10 minutes, we got to go through this quick, and I don't have a script. So, but enslaved people often married, even though it was illegal. Some enslavers actually promoted marriage to promote birth because they could make children, and we know the motherhood rule that if your mother is born enslaved, your child is automatically enslaved. And if you're birthing more children that can be enslaved, you as an enslaver are either expanding your workforce or you are expanding your capital because you can sell those enslaved children to other places. And sometimes it keeps the harmony on the plantation, right? You give them a little bit and it gives the idea that, oh no, we're keeping them well, and then you feel better because, well, I let them get married, right? But they could also be forced to marry somebody specific. So it's not always like a love marriage thing, right? If the enslaver wants to breed a good slave, which they were known for doing, they could force two enslaved people to marry and hopefully procreate. Again, as we get into like the later years, we know that you can't breed people for that, but it's 1860. Women and girls face the same physical violence as the male slaves, but they also have that fear of sexual assault. Some women did fight back. I'm sure many did, but it's difficult. And if they are successful in attacking the white man, they'd be sentenced to death usually for doing that. We know that against codes in Virginia and the South that enslaved people are not supposed to know how to read or write, but we also know that enslaved parents would teach their children to read and write in secret. And they also taught them life lessons. How do you act around white people? How do you present as one thing so that you're not unnecessarily punished or beaten or any of the above? And just like any other culture, they also had the traditions of oral storytelling. A lot of them passed down stories. The Brer Rabbit tales that you may have heard of before is a popular story that tells the story of a trickster rabbit who outwitted his antagonist every single time. Um, these are stories that they tell to, again, to pass down to their children. We know they wrote, they sang. A lot of their music had double meanings. It expressed the hardships and the evils of being enslaved, but it didn't state it clearly. So the literal meaning of the songs typically is accepted by the white people, and they're not finding it super offensive, but these songs had a deeper meaning for the enslaved people. And if we had more time, we'd listen to them. Oh, look, special appearance by the cat in the background. Anyways, again, we know some enslaved people did resist violently. Others used religious and spiritual beliefs to sustain them for survival. And we know that the white people are aware of African religious practices and typically had banned them from the plantations and their way of life. So enslaved people had started to mold these things together, right? They had old world rituals, things that had been passed down. And we're in the 1860s now, so these things have been passed down for a couple hundred years at this point. But they've also blended it with some religion that they've gone for. Remember, we're Christianizing them. We're good Christians. It's our job, our duty to Christianize the enslaved people, right? So sometimes they do blend. And there are other customs as well, traditional naming patterns. Some enslaved people carried the tradition of basket weaving. cultivating certain native African plants that they had brought from their homeland here. And this allowed a small part of Africa and the homeland to survive in the United States in a time where it seems sometimes like things were not ever going to be survivable. But it also depended on where you lived, of course. We know that Northerners enslaved people as well. They typically worked on smaller family farms. They had shorter farming cycles due to the seasons and due to the types of crops that they could grow. People in the Chesapeake, our middle region there, Maryland, Chesapeake Bay, that area, they typically worked the tobacco fields, which is a lot more labor intensive than farming corn, you know. And then in the deep south, where we're talking here are Georgia's, Alabama's, Mississippi, the deep, deep south, right? Cotton and sugar, and these are the really large plantations that you probably picture when you're thinking of a plantation. So cotton and sugar are very labor intensive. Laboring on a cotton plantation is very hard work. Cotton production begins in March. You start the planting in March, then you have to weed it. You have to tend to the plants until the August harvest, when everybody is called out into the fields, and any field hand is called out to pick the cotton, and then you have to harvest that cotton throughout the fall and early winter. And the plants continue to grow cotton balls. This is not a one-time only thing. It's not like a flower where you take the flower off and it's gone. They're still growing cotton balls, so you have to continue the process. And we remember back when Eli Whitney made the cotton gin. The cotton gin was to speed up the process of harvesting the cotton balls so that the enslaved people could pull more faster, more efficiency. So when the South industrializes with the Industrial Revolution there, I know that was a terrible way of saying that, the Industrial Revolution, right? They're not industrializing to lessen the work on the enslaved people. They're industrializing to equip the agrarian economy to be faster. And we do have a quote here that I'll wrap this up with from Solomon Northup, who is a free northern black man who had illicitly been sold into enslavement and has forced to pick cotton in Louisiana. And he says, an ordinary day's work is 200 pounds. The cotton grows from 5 to 7 feet high, each stalk having a great many branches, shooting out in all directions and lapping above each other above the water furrow. The hands are required to be in the cotton field as long as it is white in the morning, and with the exception of 10 or 15 minutes, which is given them at noon to swallow their allowance of cold bacon, they are not permitted to be a moment idle until it is too dark to see, and when the moon is full, they oftentimes labor till the middle of the night. They do not dare to stop at dinner time, nor return to the quarters, however late it be, until the order to halt is given by the driver. The day's work over in the field, the baskets are toted, or in other words, carried to the gin houses, where the cotton is weighed. No matter how fatigued and weary he may be, and no matter how much he longs for sleep and rest, a slave never approaches the gin house with his basket of cotton but with fear. If it falls short in weight, if he has not performed the full task appointed him, he knows that he must suffer. And if he has exceeded it by 10 or 20 pounds, in all probability his master will measure the next day's task accordingly. So whether he has too little or too much, his approach to the gin house is always with fear and trembling. Most frequently, they have too little, and therefore it is that they are not anxious to leave the field. After weighing, follow the whippings, and then the baskets are carried to the cotton house.